Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to BNC World Headquarters on this Thursday, May 28th. I'm Laverne McGee.
And I am Fred Hickman. Happy to have you with us. The recent cases of racial injustice have caused outrage from people who had previously just been silent.
Unfortunately, the hashtag Black Lives Matter is trending now more than ever. Our next guest is a civil rights activist who's been a leading voice with the Black Lives Matter movement. Deray McKesson joins us live now from Baltimore, Maryland. Welcome to BNC Prime News.
It's good to be here.
All right, good to see you, Deray. Now, when you became a part of Black Lives Matter, did you ever think that racism in 2020 would escalate to the level that it is right now?
So here's the thing. So spent the last 6 years sort of exclusively focusing on the issue of police violence. And the police have actually killed more people since the protests, not less. People thought that it got better just because it wasn't in the news as much. But even when we think about 2020, the police killed at the same rate and the same number of people in March and April of 2020 as they did in March and April of 2019. So even during quarantine, even during the lockdown, even during a time where crime is at a historic low all across the country, the police have still killed people. So I'm not surprised. I am always saddened by the murders, and also know that there have been at least 400 people shot and killed by the police already in 2020.
My goodness. Well, you obviously have seen the protests in Minneapolis. Do you feel peaceful protests can work, or do you understand why things have turned violent in Minneapolis?
So here's the thing. I don't have to condone it to understand it, and I understand the pain that people have. I remember being in the street in Ferguson, being in the street in Baltimore, and countless other cities. I'm mindful that the protesters have killed no one. That the protesters are in the street because someone was killed that they knew, loved, and identified with. And we could end all of this if we just ended the violence of the police today. That this actually isn't the responsibility of the protesters. They are responding to a crisis, and this could have been avoided.
Well, you know, when you look at it, Deray, we see the surface problem, but what do you think is the underlying factor here? Why do you think things seem to be getting worse with race relations than they were before?
Yeah, I don't even know if they're getting worse as much as I think that we're capturing the data differently. And, you know, we do see that it's been pretty consistent. The police have killed pretty consistently for as long as we have identifiable data. Now, there are two things that really matter. It's the rules around when officers can use force, and then the rules around accountability. So in Minneapolis, for instance, chokeholds are not banned in Minneapolis. They are not against policy. There's like some slight nuances about when you can chokehold somebody, but they're not banned like they are in a lot of other major cities. So it's not clear that this officer violated policy when he essentially put him in a chokehold or like restricted his airway. That's not against policy in Minneapolis. And, you know, policy is the easiest thing to change. The police chief or mayor could change policy overnight. And then there are rules around accountability. So in Minneapolis in 2016, a set of organizers did an incredible job pushing, and they got a clause put in the contract that said an officer has a duty to intervene if they see their partner engaged in wrongdoing. And that clause is the only way that those other officers who just stood there, that they were held accountable. So, you know, I will say I've been in a lot of rooms, and there are not a lot of politicians who are politically courageous enough to stand up against the police. A lot of people just let the police do what they want.
Well, you mentioned policy, and I get that, but what about just common human decency? You know, where has that gone? It seems as though we've reverted back to the 1960s with this whole process.
Yeah, I think I stopped relying on like the goodwill of racist people to do good, because we've never seen that sort of turn out to be a game changer with regard to the outcomes. I will say, though, I'm reminded that the police choose to kill, right? They don't have to kill people, but this is a choice. And you'd be shocked. It's like, you know, when we ask people what % of arrests do you think happen for violent crime, people say really high numbers. Do you know that for decades, the rate of violent crime has been about 5%? Like, it's just not, what's happening in communities is not what people think is happening. People think that like there's crime and destruction. 5% of the arrests that happen in the country are for violent crime, and that's an FBI statistic. That the police are choosing to inflict this damage, and it's not the responsibility of community to fix it. That's on the police.
So do you know why the police have so much power? As you say, you feel that politicians don't want to take on the police force. Do you have any thoughts on why, or any understanding of why that is?
Yeah, you know, people are just really afraid of challenging the police. But more importantly, most people can't conceive about safety without the police. So when you talk to people about safety in communities, like the police is sort of their go-to. But I'd ask both of you now, like, think of the place where you feel the most safe. Just like get it in your mind, a place where you feel the most safe. Are the police in that place?
No.
That's a great question.
No.
And yeah, I mean, and we get that and we see it. But the question is, what do we do about it? How can we protect ourselves? How do we activate ourselves and empower ourselves in these situations? Because it just keeps happening over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. So again, it's not a sexy answer, but it is the answer. Is that the only two things that we know change police behaviors are the rules around accountability and the rules around force. And in cities where the most restrictive policies are, what the police will say is, if you restrict when I can use deadly force and then it'll make it less safe for the officer. And that's actually not true. In all the places with the most restrictive policies is actually the safest for police. So you look at laws like in Oregon. Oregon has a law that says that an officer can use deadly force if they think you just committed a felony or if they think you're about to commit a felony. What do you do in that situation? That's wild, right?
Yeah.
So part of the work is like focusing people on these deeply structural things that'll change it. And like in Minneapolis, they could ban chokeholds tomorrow. It's a choice not to. This isn't like a legislative thing, no vote necessary, no timeline. Like these are choices.
All right, Deray McKesson joining us from Baltimore. Thank you so much for your insights and for giving us some questions that we need to think about. Thank you, man.
Good to be here.